Chapter 1. The Birthday Promise. Nathan Cross woke before his alarm, the pale gray of early morning pressing softly through the curtains. For a few seconds, he lay still, listening to the quiet rhythm of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car passing outside. 42, he thought. The number settled in his chest with an unfamiliar weight. He turned his head and looked at Jessica, sleeping beside him. She lay on her back, perfectly still, her face calm in a way it rarely was anymore. Once she used to curl toward him in her sleep, her hand instinctively finding his arm. Lately, there was always space between them, as if an invisible line divided the bed. Nathan watched her for a moment longer than necessary, searching her face for some hint of what today would bring. Jessica had been unusually secretive all week. "Just trust me," she'd said 3 nights ago when he asked why she needed his suit pressed. Her tone had been light, but her eyes hadn't quite matched it. "I'm planning something nice for once. You deserve it. You deserve it." The words replayed in his mind as Nathan pushed himself out of bed. He showered, dressed for work, and moved through the house with the quiet habits of a man who didn't want to disturb the fragile peace he hoped the day would bring. In the kitchen, his phone buzzed with notifications. "Happy birthday, man. Greg 42 looks good on you. Linda from accounting, don't let her forget the cake." His sister, Emily. Nathan smiled faintly and set the phone down. Birthdays had become simpler over the years. Dinners at home, a shared bottle of wine, a polite card. He hadn't expected much more than that. But this year felt different. The hotel. That was the part he couldn't stop thinking about. Jessica had told him they were going out to dinner that evening. Nothing more. But when he casually asked where, she'd hesitated just a beat too long before saying the name of the hotel downtown. The same one where they'd gotten married 14 years earlier. That alone stirred something in him. They'd been young then. Poor, hopeful, ridiculously certain that love would smooth over anything. He remembered standing in that ballroom, hands sweating, watching Jessica walk toward him in her white dress, her smile so bright it felt like a promise that could never be broken. The memory tightened his throat. At work, Nathan tried to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting. He caught himself staring at his screen, numbers blurring together. 42 wasn't old, he told himself, but it wasn't young either. It was an age that made you look back and take inventory. He thought about the overtime shifts he'd taken so Jessica could finish her certification program. The promotions he'd passed on because they required travel and she didn't want to be alone. The weekends he'd spent fixing things around the house while her family came and went, offering advice he never asked for. He hadn't resented it. Not then. That was what marriage was supposed to be: compromise, sacrifice, teamwork. Somewhere along the way, though, the balance had shifted. Jessica's success came quickly after her certification. New clothes, new friends, new confidence. Nathan had been proud of her, genuinely proud, but he'd also felt himself becoming smaller in her presence. Conversations turned sharp. Compliments became rare. Little comments slipped in, casual but cutting. "You're still at that company? I just thought you'd be further along by now." She never said them with cruelty. That almost made it worse. At lunch, Nathan sat alone at his desk, scrolling through old photos on his phone. Vacations they'd taken years ago. Silly selfies. A picture from their 10th anniversary, both of them laughing, foreheads pressed together. He studied Jessica's face in the photo, trying to reconcile it with the woman she'd become. Maybe tonight would change things. That was the hope he clung to. When he got home that evening, Jessica was already dressed. The sight of her stopped him mid-step. She wore a deep blue dress, elegant and sharp, her hair styled carefully. She looked impressive. Not warm, exactly, but polished. Prepared. "You look great," Nathan said, meaning it. "Thank you," she replied, checking her reflection in the mirror rather than looking at him. "You ready?" He nodded. "Yeah. Just, should I bring anything?" "No," she said quickly. "Everything's handled." The drive downtown was quiet. Streetlights streaked past the windows, and Nathan glanced at Jessica more than once, hoping she'd say something, anything, to break the tension. "So," he ventured, "this hotel idea, it's kind of nostalgic, huh?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I thought it was appropriate." "Appropriate?" The word sat oddly with him, but he let it go. As they pulled into the hotel driveway, Nathan felt a flutter of nervous excitement. The building looked just as he remembered, grand, warmly lit, timeless. Valets moved briskly, and the air smelled faintly of polished stone and expensive perfume. He straightened his jacket as they stepped inside. "Jessica," he said softly, stopping near the entrance. "Whatever tonight is, I just want you to know I appreciate the effort. I know things haven't been easy." She finally looked at him then, really looked at him. Her expression was unreadable. "We'll talk inside," she said. Nathan nodded and followed her toward the banquet hall, his heart beating faster, not with fear, but with hope. A fragile, stubborn hope that this night was about remembering who they had been, about finding their way back, about gratitude, forgiveness, and love. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped forward, still believing the dinner was a gift, still unaware that everything he trusted was about to be tested. Chapter 2. A room full of strangers. The doors to the banquet hall opened silently, gliding apart as if welcoming them into something grand. Nathan stepped forward beside Jessica, his eyes adjusting to the warm golden light spilling across polished floors and white linen tables. For half a second, he smiled until the sound hit him. Voices. Too many of them. The room wasn't softly murmuring the way an intimate dinner would. It buzzed, laughed, shifted. Chairs scraped. Glasses clinked. Nathan slowed, his steps faltering as his gaze swept across the hall. Every table was full, dozens of them. He counted without meaning to. 10 tables near the front, more along the sides, then rows extending toward the back. His chest tightened as faces turned toward the entrance. Some he recognized immediately. Jessica's parents, her aunts and uncles, cousins he'd met only once or twice at holidays. Then more, people from her professional circle, business partners he'd shaken hands with at events, co-workers he barely knew by name, and then, impossibly, people from his own life. "Is that Mark?" Nathan muttered under his breath. Mark from procurement glanced up and offered an awkward half-smile. 2 tables oversat Linda from accounting. Near the back, he spotted a former client, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Even a neighbor from their old street lifted a glass, as if this were some kind of reunion. Nathan stopped walking. "Jess," he said quietly, leaning toward her. "How many people are here?" Jessica didn't slow. "Why?" "Because this feels like a lot," he said. "I thought you said dinner." She turned to him then, her smile composed, her posture straight. "Relax. It's just family and friends." Nathan looked back at the room again. Friends. The word felt stretched thin. As they moved farther inside, conversations dipped and rose again behind them. He felt eyes following him, curious, assessing, some openly amused. A strange heat crept up his neck. This wasn't the warmth of a celebration. It was exposure. A server appeared as if on cue, gesturing politely. "Mr. and Mrs. Cross, right this way." Nathan opened his mouth to correct her, to say just "Nathan is fine," but Jessica was already moving. He followed, the soft carpet muffling his steps as unease settled deeper in his stomach. They passed a long wall lined with framed photographs. Nathan slowed again. "Wait," he said. Jessica paused this time, her expression tightening just slightly. "What is it?" He stared at the pictures. They were photos from his life. His childhood, his career, his marriage. But something was wrong. Very wrong. A picture of him at his college graduation, his face circled in red marker, the word "average" scrawled beneath it. A photo from his first job, standing proudly beside his old team. Someone had pasted a fake $sign over his head with the caption, "Still not enough." Their wedding photo, once elegant and joyful, now altered so his smile looked exaggerated, almost foolish, the word "she married" down printed below. Nathan's breath caught. "Who did this?" he asked quietly. Jessica followed his gaze, then shrugged lightly. "It's just creative. People like visuals." "People," he echoed. "Jess, these are personal." She leaned closer, her voice low. "You're being sensitive. Tonight isn't about nitpicking." Nitpicking. Nathan stepped closer to one frame, lifting his hand as if to touch it, then stopping himself. He felt as though he were looking at a distorted version of his life, rearranged by someone who had never respected it to begin with. Behind him, a laugh rang out, sharp, unrestrained. He turned to see Jessica's cousin whispering to another woman, both of them glancing toward the wall, then back at him. Neither looked away when he noticed. He straightened. "Jessica," he said, keeping his voice even, "why are all these people here? My coworkers? Your clients? This feels staged." Her eyes hardened for just a second before smoothing over again. "You're overthinking. It's a big birthday. People wanted to celebrate." Celebrate. Nathan scanned the tables again. There were no decorations that said happy birthday. No balloons. No cake. Not even a banner. The tables were set with precision, almost corporate in their symmetry. At the front of the room stood a small stage, a microphone placed carefully at its center. A stage. His pulse quickened. "Why is there a microphone?" he asked. Jessica exhaled, clearly irritated now. "Because people might want to say a few words. You don't mind that, do you?" Nathan hesitated. "I just didn't know." "You don't need to know everything," she cut in. "Just trust me." That phrase again. They reached the table reserved for them, front and center, closer to the stage than any other. A small placard read Cross Family. Nathan noticed there was only one chair on his side, while Jessica's had been positioned slightly forward, angled toward the room. He sat slowly. As he did, more faces turned toward him. Some smiled politely. Others whispered. A few didn't bother hiding their expressions at all. Curiosity mixed with something sharper. Judgment, maybe, or anticipation. Nathan folded his hands together, suddenly unsure what to do with them. He felt like he'd arrived late to a meeting he didn't know was about him. Jessica remained standing for a moment longer, scanning the room with practiced calm. She nodded to her father across the hall. He nodded back. Her sister caught her eye and smirked. It was subtle, but Nathan saw it. Something passed between them. Jessica finally sat, smoothing her dress. "You okay?" she asked, her tone neutral. "I don't know," Nathan admitted. "This doesn't feel like a birthday." Her lips curved slightly. "You'll understand soon." The lights dimmed just a fraction, not enough to darken the room, but enough to draw attention forward. Conversations softened. Chairs shifted. The microphone on the stage gleamed under a focused beam of light. Nathan swallowed. He looked once more at the walls, at the altered fragments of his life staring back at him like accusations, at the strangers who somehow knew him well enough to be invited to this moment, at the wife beside him, composed and distant, her hand not reaching for his. A cold realization settled in his chest. Whatever this night was meant to be, it wasn't a celebration. Chapter 3: The Public Execution. The microphone crackled softly as Jessica stood. The sound cut through the low murmur of the room like a blade, and every conversation died instantly. Chairs stopped shifting. Glasses froze halfway to lips. More than 100 faces turned toward her with synchronized attention, as if this moment had been rehearsed. Nathan felt his stomach drop. Jessica adjusted the microphone with calm precision, her fingers steady. She didn't look at Nathan at first. Instead, she smiled at the room, confident, composed, in control. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began. "I know many of you rearranged your schedules, and I appreciate that." Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. Nathan leaned closer to her, his voice barely audible. "Jess, what are you doing?" She ignored him. "As most of you know," Jessica continued, "today is Nathan's 42nd birthday." A few people clapped reflexively. The sound was thin, awkward. Nathan felt heat rise to his face. This wasn't how birthdays sounded. "But tonight," Jessica said, pausing deliberately, "isn't about cake or candles." She finally turned her head and looked directly at Nathan. "It's about honesty." The word landed hard. Nathan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure people could hear it. "For 14 years, Jessica went on, I've carried a marriage that never truly moved forward. A marriage where ambition was one-sided, where growth was optional, where excuses replaced effort." A murmur spread through the room, quiet, curious. Nathan shook his head slightly. "Jessica, stop," he whispered. This isn't funny. She smiled again, colder this time. Funny? No. Necessary. She straightened, addressing the room again. I've spent years defending Nathan, making explanations for him, covering for his lack of progress, his lack of drive, his lack of contribution. Nathan's pulse roared in his ears. That's not true, he said aloud before he could stop himself. His voice sounded small in the vast room. Jessica lifted a hand without looking at him, silencing him as easily as one would quiet a child. Please, she said into the microphone. You'll have your chance, though I doubt you'll know what to say. A few people chuckled, not loudly, but enough. Nathan felt something inside him fracture. When I met Nathan, Jessica continued, I believed in potential. I believed love could compensate for mediocrity. The word echoed. Mediocrity. She paced slowly, heels clicking against the floor, each step measured. But potential that never becomes reality is just a promise you keep breaking. Year after year. Nathan's hands clenched into fists under the table. You all see the successful version of me now, she said. What you didn't see were the nights I stayed up worrying about money. The conversations I had to avoid because they embarrassed me. The opportunities one outgrew while waiting for my husband to catch up. That's a lie, Nathan said, louder now. You know that's a lie. Jessica stopped walking and turned fully toward him. Oh, she asked sweetly. Then tell them, Nathan. Tell them what you built. Tell them what you provided. Every eye swung back to him. His throat closed. He thought of the mortgage payments he'd covered when she went back to school. The weekends. The sacrifices. But none of it fit neatly into a sentence that could survive this room. Silence stretched. Jessica nodded as if proving a point. Exactly. A wave of murmurs followed. Some sympathetic. Some amused. Some judging. For years, Jessica said, my family helped us stay afloat. Helped him stay afloat, while he remained comfortable being average. She gestured toward the walls. Which brings me to this. The lights dimmed further, and a soft spotlight illuminated the photo display. Gasps rippled through the hall. Nathan turned slowly in his chair, his chest tightening as the images came into sharper focus. Photos he'd already seen, but now fully revealed, larger, impossible to ignore. The labels were bolder now. Mediocre. Useless. Wasted potential. A picture of him fixing his sink, captioned, can't even hire a plumber. A photo from company picnic. Still not the boss. A candid shot from a family holiday. The one we carry. Laughter broke out, hesitant at first, then louder as people realized Jessica wasn't stopping it. Nathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Take these down, he said, his voice shaking. This is cruel. Jessica turned to him, eyes sharp. Cruel is forcing someone to live below their standards. She faced the room again. Tonight, I'm ending this marriage. The words hit with a finality that sucked the air from Nathan's lungs. I am divorcing Nathan Cross, she announced clearly, because I refuse to keep dragging someone forward who insists on standing still. A few people clapped. Not many, but enough. Nathan looked around in disbelief. Faces he thought were neutral now seemed entertained. Curious. Some even approving. This was judgment disguised as celebration. This is a birthday, he asked hoarsely. This is what you planned. Jessica met his gaze without flinching. I plan honesty. Publicly. So there could be no more confusion. Nathan swallowed, his vision blurring. He felt stripped, not just of dignity, but of history. Of context. Of truth. Jessica gestured once more toward the wall of images. Let this be clear, she said. This is who Nathan chose to be. She let the silence hang. The photos stared back at him, frozen accusations lining the walls. Mediocre. Useless. And in that moment, standing in a room full of people who thought they knew his story, Nathan understood that this wasn't a conversation. It was an execution. Chapter 4. The $248,000 lie. The applause died slowly, like an echo losing its courage. Nathan was still standing when the sound faded, his chair tipped awkwardly behind him. His heart hammered so hard it felt detached from his body, like it belonged to someone else. He could feel every eye on him, some burning, some curious, some indifferent. Jessica had already sat back down, calm as if she'd just finished a presentation instead of dismantling a marriage in public. Then another chair moved. Richard Brennan rose from his seat. Jessica's father was a tall man with silver hair, and a posture that suggested authority came naturally to him. He adjusted his jacket, glanced briefly at Jessica, and then walked toward the stage with unhurried confidence. A few people straightened in their seats. Others leaned forward. Nathan felt a new, colder unease crawl up his spine. This wasn't over. Richard took the microphone from its stand, tapping it once with his finger. "Good evening," he said, his voice deep and practiced. "I hadn't planned to speak tonight, but given the circumstances, it's necessary." Necessary. Nathan swallowed and sat back down slowly, his legs suddenly weak. "For years," Richard continued, "my family has remained quiet, discreet, supportive." He looked around the room, making deliberate eye contact with familiar faces. "We didn't want to embarrass anyone." Nathan's chest tightened. "But silence can be mistaken for consent," Richard said. "And tonight, I refuse to let the truth be buried." He reached into a leather folder he'd been carrying and pulled out a thick stack of papers. The sound of them shifting echoed unnaturally loud in the quiet hall. "This," Richard said, holding them up, "is a detailed accounting of every dollar my family has spent supporting Nathan Cross." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Nathan shook his head. "That's not." Richard raised a hand, not even bothering to look at him. "Please, you've had enough interruptions for one night." A few people laughed softly. Richard stepped closer to Nathan's table and placed the stack of papers directly in front of him with a firm slap. The top page was bold, clinical, and unmistakable. Total amount due. $248,000. Nathan stared at the number, his mind refusing to process it. $248,000, Richard said clearly, ensuring everyone heard. "Every cent we wasted trying to help you become something you never bothered to be." Nathan looked up sharply. "Wasted?" His voice cracked. "Those were gifts. You said they were gifts." Richard smiled thinly. "That's what we told you. At the time." The words hit harder than the number. Richard turned slightly so the room could see the document. Living expenses, emergency funds, career transitions, vacations you couldn't afford, bills you failed to plan for. He flipped a page. "We kept records, because responsible people always do." "That's not true," Nathan said, louder now, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "I paid my share. I worked. Richard interrupted sharply. "Showing up is not the same as providing." Jessica crossed her legs, watching silently. "These were loans," Richard continued, his voice smooth again. "Unspoken, perhaps, but legally valid." He leaned in closer to Nathan. "And now they are due." Nathan pushed the papers away as if they burned. "You can't just decide that after the fact." Richard chuckled. "You'd be surprised what courts decide when documentation exists." The word courts landed heavily. Richard straightened and addressed the room again. "Failure to repay this debt will leave us no choice but to pursue legal remedies." Someone near the back whispered, "Is that real?" Another voice murmured, "That's a lot of money." Richard nodded gravely. "Wage garnishment, asset seizure, and in cases of fraud," he looked directly at Nathan now, "potential criminal liability." Nathan's breath caught. "Criminal?" "Yes," Richard said calmly. "Obtaining funds under false pretenses is a serious matter." "That's insane," Nathan said. "You offered help. I never lied to you." Richard leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to feel intimate and threatening. "Intent is a flexible thing in court, Nathan, especially when one party looks unmotivated." A cold sweat broke across Nathan's back. Jessica finally spoke. "Dad, just be clear with him." Richard nodded. "Of course." He turned back to Nathan. "You can repay this quietly and preserve what little dignity you have left. Or we can make this official." Nathan looked around the room desperately, searching for a familiar face, someone to object, to speak up. His sister wasn't there. His friends looked away. Even his co-workers sat stiffly, uncertain, unwilling to get involved. No one moved. The silence was worse than the laughter. "You're trying to scare me," Nathan said. "This won't hold up." Richard smiled again, slow, and patronizing. Fear is a natural response when consequences finally arrive. He tapped the top page of the bill. 30 days. After that, attorneys get involved. Nathan's hands trembled. You're threatening me. On my birthday. Richard shrugged. You chose the timing by failing for 14 years. A few people nodded. Someone muttered, that's fair. Nathan felt something collapse inside his chest, not loudly, but completely. Richard slid the papers closer to him. I suggest you read carefully. There are clauses here you don't want to ignore. Nathan didn't touch them. He stared at the number again, $248,000, printed so neatly it looked unreal. A fiction dressed up as authority. A lie wrapped in legal language. Richard straightened his jacket and took a step back, satisfied. We didn't want this to be ugly, he said. But accountability rarely is. He returned to his seat beside Jessica's mother, who patted his arm approvingly. Nathan sat frozen, the bill untouched in front of him, the room unnaturally quiet again. He felt boxed in, from the stage, from the tables, from the walls lined with distorted memories of his life. The threat hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. And for the first time that night, Nathan understood they weren't just humiliating him. They were trying to bury him. Chapter 5. Everything taken at once. Nathan was still staring at the papers when a sharp click cut through the quiet. Amber Brennan stood up. Jessica's younger sister had been watching the room with barely concealed amusement, her manicured fingers drumming against the table as if waiting for her cue. Now she smiled and stepped away from her chair, heels tapping crisply against the floor as she approached Nathan's table. Wow, she said lightly, loud enough for several nearby tables to hear. This is getting heavy. Maybe we should lighten things up a bit. Nathan looked up, confused and exhausted. Amber, what are you doing? She didn't answer him. Instead, she leaned forward and reached across the table. Before Nathan could react, she snatched the keys lying beside his phone. The metallic jingle echoed in the silence. Hey, Nathan stood halfway. Give those back. Amber held them up between two fingers, swinging them slightly. These? Yes, he said sharply. Those are my car keys. Amber laughed. Not anymore. The words landed with casual cruelty. What does that mean? Nathan asked. Amber turned toward the room, clearly enjoying the attention. It means the car you drove here tonight? It doesn't belong to you. Nathan felt his stomach drop. That's not true. Oh, it is, Amber replied. Actually, the title transfer was finalized last week. Nathan looked at Jessica. Jess. Jessica didn't look surprised. She didn't look apologetic either. We discussed this, she said coolly. It was necessary. We discussed nothing, Nathan said. That car is in my name. Amber shook her head and pulled a folded document from her clutch. Used to be. She slapped it onto the table next to the bill, the papers fanning out like a verdict. Signed. Notarized. Filed. Amber said cheerfully. Congratulations. You just lost your ride. Nathan stared at the document, his head spinning. You can't transfer my car without me. Amber shrugged. You'd be amazed what happens when spouses cooperate. Nathan's hands curled into fists. I never signed that. Jessica crossed her arms. You don't remember signing a lot of things, Nathan. That's a lie. Amber leaned closer, lowering her voice. Relax. I'll take good care of it. It's a nice car. You always liked pretending it was yours. A few people laughed openly this time. Nathan's chest felt tight, his breathing shallow. This is theft. Amber smirked. No, this is redistribution. She dropped the keys in her purse and snapped it shut. Nathan looked around again, at the faces watching, the expressions ranging from curiosity to satisfaction. No one intervened. No one questioned it. The humiliation wasn't chaotic anymore. It was methodical, piece by piece. Before Nathan could speak again, movement near the entrance caught his eye. The doors to the banquet hall opened once more. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, scanning the room with visible discomfort. Nathan recognized him instantly. Steve, Nathan said aloud before he could stop himself. Steve Miller, his department head. His boss. A ripple of whispers spread through the room as Steve approached, his steps hesitant, his jaw tight. He stopped a few feet from the table, avoiding Nathan's eyes at first. Steve, Nathan said, relief surging briefly. "What are you doing here?" Steve cleared his throat. "Nathan, I was asked to attend." "Asked by who?" Nathan demanded. Steve glanced at Jessica, then at Richard Brennan. Jessica gestured calmly. "Please, go ahead." Steve exhaled slowly, as if bracing himself. "Nathan, I'm sorry. This isn't easy." A chill spread through Nathan's body. "What isn't easy?" Steve pulled a tablet from his briefcase. Earlier this week, HR received several emails. Complaints. Nathan frowned. Complaints about what? Steve hesitated. Harassment. Inappropriate communication. Hostile behavior. The room erupted in murmurs. "What?" Nathan said. "That's insane." Steve turned the tablet so Nathan could see the screen. Email threads. His name at the top. Messages he'd never written. "This isn't me," Nathan said immediately. "I didn't send these." "The language patterns match," Steve said weakly. "The timestamps, they're fake," Nathan snapped. "You know me. You know I'd never—" "Please," Steve said quietly. "Let me finish." Nathan fell silent, his heart pounding. "Given the severity of the accusations," Steve continued, "and the corroborating documentation, the company has decided to terminate your employment effective immediately." The words rang hollow at first, like they hadn't fully registered. Terminate. Immediately. Nathan stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "You're firing me? Right now?" Steve nodded grimly. "Your access has already been revoked." Jessica leaned back in her chair, satisfied. "You didn't even investigate," Nathan said, his voice breaking. "You didn't call me. You didn't ask. The decision came from above," Steve said. "Legal advised swift action." Nathan laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "So you came here to fire me? At my birthday dinner?" Steve's face flushed. "I didn't know it was your birthday." Several people avoided Nathan's gaze now. Others watched intently, as if this were the climax they'd been waiting for. Nathan looked at Steve. "After everything I've done for that company." Steve swallowed. "I'm sorry." Nathan turned slowly, taking it all in. The bill, the car, the job, the marriage, all gone in the span of minutes. He looked at Jessica again, his voice low. "You planned this." She met his stare without emotion. "I planned closure." Amber laughed softly. "Efficient, right?" Nathan felt hollow. Stripped. Like every anchor had been cut at once. No wife. No car. No income. No reputation. He stood there in the center of the room, surrounded by people who had watched it happen and done nothing. The attack wasn't just emotional anymore, it was total. Marriage, career, independence, all destroyed in one night. Chapter 6, The Refusal. The room didn't erupt after Nathan lost his job. It settled, like dust after a demolition. People leaned back in their chairs, some whispering, some scrolling their phones, others watching Nathan with the quiet satisfaction of an audience that believed the show had reached its conclusion. Nathan stood in the middle of it all, breathing slowly, his heart no longer racing, just heavy, strangely steady. Jessica rose again. This time, she didn't go to the microphone. She lifted a thin folder from beneath the table and walked toward the stage, heels clicking with deliberate calm. She turned, faced the crowd, then looked directly at Nathan. "Since everything is out in the open now," she said, "we might as well finish this properly." She opened the folder and removed a stack of documents, crisp and neatly organized. "Divorce papers," she announced. A low murmur spread through the room. Jessica held them up so everyone could see. Clean. Simple. No unnecessary drama. Nathan stared at the papers. He didn't move. "You'll sign tonight," she continued. "Right here." She gestured toward the stage table, where a pen had already been placed. "Prepared. These terms reflect reality," Jessica said evenly. "I keep the house, the savings, the investments. You walk away without complications." Nathan let out a slow breath through his nose. "Without complications," he repeated quietly. Jessica's jaw tightened. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Richard Brennan stood as well, positioning himself slightly behind Jessica. "This is the dignified option, Nathan," he said. "Sign, and we all move on." Amber smirked. "You've lost everything already. Might as well stop embarrassing yourself." Nathan looked at each of them in turn. Then he looked at the crowd. Over 100 people. Co-workers. Family. Strangers. Witnesses. He stepped forward. The movement alone drew silence. For the first time that night, Nathan spoke without shaking. "I'm not signing anything," he said. Jessica blinked once. "Excuse me." "I said no," Nathan repeated calmly. "I'm not signing." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. "You don't have leverage," Jessica said sharply. "You have no job, no car, no money." Nathan nodded. "That's what you want everyone to believe." He reached for the papers on the table, not to take them, but to straighten them, aligning the edges carefully. The small, deliberate action unsettled something in the room. "You've made several claims tonight," Nathan said, his voice steady, carrying farther than he expected. "Let's review them." Jessica scoffed. "This isn't a courtroom." "No," Nathan agreed. "But it is public." He turned slightly, addressing the room. "You've accused me of financial dependency," he said. "Yet many of the so-called loans presented tonight were explicitly described as gifts. In writing, via email. Some of you were present when those offers were made." A few heads shifted uncomfortably. "You've claimed ownership of my car," Nathan continued, glancing briefly at Amber. "Yet any title transfer without my consent is illegal, especially one executed without my presence." Amber's smile faltered. "You've accused me of workplace misconduct," Nathan said, looking towards Steve. "Based on emails I did not send. Emails that can be traced, time-stamped, and verified." Steve swallowed. "And now," Nathan said, turning back to Jessica, "you want me to sign divorce papers prepared under duress. On a stage. In front of witnesses." Jessica's composure cracked just slightly. "You're bluffing." Nathan shook his head. "I'm observing." Richard stepped forward. "Careful, Nathan. You're in no position to threaten anyone." "I'm not threatening," Nathan said quietly. "I'm stating facts." He looked around the room again, meeting eyes this time. "There are over 100 witnesses here tonight," he said, "to defamation, to coercion, to the presentation of fraudulent documents, to intimidation." The word fraudulent hung in the air. Jessica's voice sharpened. "Sit down. You're making a fool of yourself." Nathan didn't raise his voice. "That already happened. You just misjudged who it would reflect on." A tense silence followed. Richard leaned in close to Nathan, lowering his voice. "Sign the papers, or this gets worse." Nathan met his gaze evenly. "Worse than public humiliation, false debt, theft, and wrongful termination." Richard said nothing. Jessica extended the pen toward Nathan, her hand rigid. "This ends tonight." Nathan looked at the pen. Then he pushed it gently back toward her. "No," he said again. Jessica's control snapped. "You think walking away makes you noble? You're nothing without us." Nathan straightened. "Then you don't need my signature." That landed harder than any raised voice. Nathan stepped back from the table. He didn't rush. He didn't look down. He picked up his jacket from the chair, slipped it on, and adjusted the cuffs. The room watched in absolute silence. "You're making a mistake," Jessica said. Nathan paused at the edge of the stage. He looked at her one last time, not with anger, not with sadness, but with clarity. "No," he said softly. "I'm correcting one." He turned and walked down the aisle between the tables. No one spoke. No one followed. The sound of his footsteps was the only thing breaking the stillness. He reached the doors, didn't look back, and without shouting, without begging, without giving them the collapse they wanted, Nathan Cross walked out. Chapter 7. The Calls Begin. Nathan didn't sleep the first night. He sat on the edge of the bed in the small guest room of a modest motel just off the highway, his jacket still folded over the chair, his shoes still on the floor where he'd kicked them off hours earlier. The room smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet. It was quiet in a way only temporary places were. No history, no comfort, just walls. His phone lay face down on the bedside table. It vibrated. Once. He didn't touch it. A minute later, it vibrated again. Then again. Then it didn't stop. Nathan turned it over slowly. The screen lit up like a warning flare. Jessica, 6 missed calls Richard Brennan, 3 missed calls Amber, 4 missed calls. A text notification slid across the screen. "Jessica." "Nathan, answer your phone. We need to talk." He exhaled slowly and turned the phone face down again. Silence had never felt so intentional. By morning, the numbers had doubled. He showered, dressed, and left the motel without checking out properly. The clerk didn't ask questions. Nathan doubted she noticed him at all. He drove, borrowed a car from a co-worker who didn't ask questions either, and let the road stretch until his thoughts finally slowed. The calls followed him. At a red light, the phone buzzed again. Amber, you can't just disappear. You're making this worse. At a gas station. Richard Brennan. This is not how adults handle responsibility. At a diner where Nathan sat alone with coffee growing cold in front of him. Jessica, please answer. This got out of hand. That one made his fingers twitch. Got out of hand. He stared at the words for a long moment, then locked the phone and slid it into his pocket. For 3 days, Nathan didn't respond. He let the voicemail inbox fill. Let the text stack into unread columns. Let panic replace the confidence he'd seen on their faces that night. On the 4th day, he checked his email. There were messages there too, formal now. Carefully worded. Subject. Clarification subject. Urgent, legal matter subject. Misunderstanding Nathan leaned back in his chair and laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. They were changing tactics. That afternoon, he sat across from a woman named Claire Donovan in a small law office that smelled faintly of coffee and paper. She was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed, with a calm demeanor that made Nathan feel, for the first time since the dinner, that he wasn't drowning. Start from the beginning, she said, clicking her pen. And don't summarize. So he didn't. He told her everything. The hotel, the crowd, the photos, Jessica's speech, the bill, the car, the firing, the divorce papers on the stage, the witnesses, all of it. Claire didn't interrupt. She took notes. Occasionally, her eyebrows lifted slightly, not in surprise, but in recognition. When Nathan finished, the room was quiet. Finally, she set the pen down. They did this publicly? She asked. Yes. In front of co-workers? Yes. Presented alleged debt documents? Yes. Threatened criminal consequences? Yes. She leaned back slowly. That was remarkably reckless. Nathan frowned. Reckless. Claire nodded. People who commit fraud usually try to hide it. Your wife's family put it on a stage. Something shifted in Nathan's chest. Claire continued. Let's break this down. The debt. Were you ever told it was a loan? No. Never. And the car title. Did you sign anything? No. And your termination. Did HR investigate? Not that I know of. Claire's mouth curved into something close to a smile. Good. Nathan blinked. Good. Because this isn't just one issue, she said. It's several. And they're all connected. She turned her legal pad toward him. On it, she'd drawn a rough list. Defamation, coercion, fraud, forgery, wrongful termination, and she added, tapping the paper, dozens of witnesses. Nathan swallowed. Over the next few hours, they reconstructed the night piece by piece. Times. Statements. Who said what? Where people were sitting. Who could corroborate which claims? Did anyone laugh when the photos were revealed? Claire asked. Yes. Did anyone question the debt? No. Did anyone hear the threats of prison? Yes. Very clearly. Claire nodded, writing quickly. Public record doesn't just mean documents. It means memory. When Nathan left her office that evening, the weight he'd been carrying felt different. Still heavy, but now structured, defined. His phone buzzed again as he stepped outside. Jessica, 14 missed calls. He finally opened the latest voicemail. Her voice was different now. Lower. Tight. Nathan, please. We didn't think you'd walk away. My dad is upset. This is becoming a problem. Call me. A problem. He deleted it. That night, as rain tapped against the motel window, Nathan laid the documents Claire had requested out on the bed, old emails, bank statements, screenshots he'd thought were meaningless at the time. Patterns emerged. Timelines aligned. This hadn't been impulsive. It had been planned and badly executed. By the end of the week, the calls became frantic. Amber left voicemails that jumped from anger to pleading. You're being dramatic. You don't understand what you're doing. Just talk to us. Richard's messages grew colder. You are escalating this unnecessarily. You will regret refusing to cooperate. Jessica's text came late at night. I didn't mean for it to go that far. My dad pushed things. Please just answer me. Nathan didn't. He sat at the small desk in his motel room, organizing notes, dates, names. The chaos of that night was slowly transforming into a clear picture, one he could finally see from the outside. They hadn't just humiliated him. They had exposed themselves. And as Nathan stared at the evidence spread before him, he understood the full scale of what had been committed in public, and why the silence he maintained now frightened them more than anything he could have said. Chapter 8. The Collapse of Their Scheme. The first letter arrived on a Monday. Nathan recognized the return address immediately. Claire Donovan's firm, printed cleanly in the corner of the envelope. He stood in the narrow hallway of his apartment, keys still in his hand, staring at it as if it might disappear if he blinked. It didn't. Inside was a copy of a formal legal notice, crisp and impersonal, addressed to Richard Brennan. The language was precise, calm, devastating. Nathan sat at the small kitchen table and read it twice. Then a third time. They're requesting documentation, Claire had said the day before. Original agreements, proof of loan intent, signatures, correspondence. If it exists, they'll produce it. If it doesn't, she'd let the sentence trail off. Silence becomes evidence. Silence arrived quickly. Within a week, the supposed $248,000 loan began to unravel. Bank records were subpoenaed. Emails were recovered. Messages Nathan barely remembered, casual notes from Jessica's parents offering help, congratulating him on promotions, calling them money support, a gift, family helping family. Claire laid them out neatly during their next meeting. They never once used the word loan, she said. Not in 14 years. Nathan stared at the highlighted passages. Don't worry about paying us back. We're proud of you. This is what family does. So it's fake, Nathan said. Claire nodded. Legally? Yes. Completely. The second letter arrived 2 days later, this one from the county clerk's office. The car title transfer had been flagged. Nathan read the explanation slowly, disbelief giving way to something almost like grim satisfaction. The signature authorizing the transfer didn't match his. The notarization time conflicted with his verified work hours. The notary listed had no record of the transaction. Forgery. By the end of the week, the title was restored. Claire slid the confirmation across the table. Your car is legally yours again. Nathan exhaled, long and unsteady. She took my keys like it was nothing. Claire's eyes hardened. People who rely on intimidation assume no one will check the details. The checking had only begun. Steve Miller called next. Nathan almost didn't answer, but Claire had advised him to let certain conversations happen. Hey, Steve said awkwardly. HR wants to schedule a meeting. Nathan's voice was flat. About what? There was a pause. The emails. Nathan said nothing. They were traced, Steve continued. IP addresses. Login times. They didn't come from your account. Nathan closed his eyes. They came from an external device, Steve said. One that accessed the server using credentials obtained through someone else. Jessica. Steve didn't say her name, but he didn't need to. Legal is calling it wrongful termination, Steve added quietly. They want to make this right. The meeting took place 3 days later. Nathan sat across from 2 HR representatives and a company attorney in a glass-walled conference room. The city hummed beyond the windows, indifferent and constant. We failed our due diligence, the attorney admitted. Your termination was improper. Improper. It felt like an understatement. They reinstated him on the spot. Back pay. Restored benefits. A formal apology placed in his personnel file. The HR manager avoided his eyes as she slid the documents forward. There will be internal consequences, she said. For those involved. Nathan signed nothing he didn't read twice. Word traveled fast. Witnesses from the dinner began responding to inquiries, some reluctantly, others with visible relief. Yes, I heard the threat about prison. They said the money was a loan that night, but I remembered hearing it was a gift years ago. The firing happened in front of everyone. Emails arrived. Calls followed. A former co-worker apologized for staying silent. A distant cousin admitted the night had felt wrong. Even one of Jessica's business partners provided a statement, disturbed by how calculated the event had seemed. The performance had backfired. What was meant to humiliate Nathan had created a room full of observers, people who now realized they'd witnessed something illegal. Richard Brennan's attorney requested a meeting. Claire declined. Instead, she sent a packet. It contained timelines, contradictions, copies of statements from witnesses, financial records, notations in the margins. Nathan watched Claire seal the envelope. "They're exposed," she said simply. Jessica's parents stopped calling after that. Amber's name appeared once more, on a cease and desist letter warning her against further contact or misrepresentation of property ownership. Claire read it aloud before sending it. Amber didn't respond. The final confirmation came on a Friday afternoon. Nathan sat alone in his car, hands resting on the steering wheel that had once been taken from him, reading the message on his phone. Debt claim dismissed. No legal standing. Vehicle title restored. Employment reinstated with full compensation. He let his head fall back against the seat. For the first time since his birthday, the tension in his shoulders eased. Later that evening, he met Claire one last time for the week. She slid a neatly organized folder across the desk. "This is everything," she said. "What they tried to do, and what failed." Nathan flipped through the pages slowly. Each document felt like a correction of the narrative, of the lies, of the story that had been told about him in that room. "They really thought they could do all of this in public," he said quietly. Claire nodded. "They thought the crowd would protect them." Nathan looked up. Instead, it trapped them. She smiled faintly. Exactly. As he left the office, Nathan felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not triumph, not joy, but certainty. The scheme had collapsed under its own weight. The fake debt was gone. The gifts were proven gifts. The stolen car was returned. The firing was reversed. The witnesses had spoken. What began as a performance had become evidence. And everyone who mattered now knew it. Chapter 9, Begging Too Late. Nathan's phone vibrated again. This time, a single text that read, "Can we meet? Please. I need to explain." He didn't reply. Not immediately. Instead, he drove across the city in silence, gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline, memories of the birthday ambush looping in his mind. The streets were wet from a light drizzle, reflecting neon signs and headlights in fractured lines. Everything looked familiar, yet alien. It had all changed. The address led him to a quiet cafe tucked between two office buildings. Its windows were fogged, warm light spilling out into the darkened street. Inside, Jessica was already seated at a corner table. Her hair was tied back neatly, and her expression carried something Nathan hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability. He paused at the entrance, breathing in, steadying himself. Jessica looked up and smiled softly, not the cold, calculated smile from the dinner, but something desperate, human. "Nathan," she said quietly as he approached. "Thank you for coming." Nathan pulled out the chair opposite her, but didn't sit immediately. He stayed standing, letting her feel the weight of his presence. "Can we talk?" she asked again. Her voice cracked slightly. I need to explain what happened." Nathan finally sat, folding his hands in front of him. "I'm listening," he said calmly. Jessica exhaled, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up her coffee. "It was my father," she admitted. "He pushed everything. The bill, the car, the humiliation. I thought I was just following along, that it would be a warning. Not this." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "A warning?" Jessica nodded, her eyes wide, pleading. "Yes. A warning to, I don't know, make you see me differently, respect the family, respect me. I never meant for it to spiral. Not the way it did." "Not the way it did?" Nathan echoed softly, letting the words hang. "Jessica, you humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. You orchestrated theft, forged documents, and had my career ended publicly. And you call this not spiraling?" "I know," she whispered, tears brimming. "I know, and I'm sorry. I regret it. Every moment. I never thought it would go this far. I wanted us to work things out. That night, I thought if I did something dramatic, maybe you'd see things from my perspective. Maybe we could, I don't know, reconnect." Nathan stared at her, calm now, detached. The storm he had felt during the ambush, during the chaos, had cooled into something more formidable. Clarity. You thought humiliation would lead to reconciliation? He asked quietly. You thought stealing my car and threatening me would bring me back? Jessica's hands clenched around her coffee cup. I was desperate and scared. I was foolish. I admit that. But Nathan held up a hand. Stop. She froze. He continued, voice steady but firm. I've spent the past weeks putting the pieces back together. I've rebuilt what you and your family tried to destroy. My career, my possessions, my reputation, everything you attacked, I've corrected. Her lips quivered. But there is no us anymore, Nathan said gently. The us that existed before that night, that person is gone. I don't get to pretend the past never happened. I don't get to act like your regrets undo what was done. Jessica shook her head slowly. Nathan, please. I'm asking you. I can't. You're asking me to go backward, Nathan interrupted. To ignore what was done, to pretend that public humiliation, theft, and lies are forgivable because now you feel guilty. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I do feel guilty. I don't doubt that, Nathan said. But guilt doesn't erase consequences, and it certainly doesn't restore trust. You've had your chance to act differently, and you didn't. Jessica's hands covered her face briefly, then fell to the table. So this is it? Nathan nodded once, firmly. It is. She looked up at him, desperation and sorrow etched into every line of her face. So you're done? Yes, Nathan said calmly. I'm done. I'm done with manipulation. I'm done with lies. And I'm done being someone else's performance piece. She lowered her eyes, swallowing hard. I don't know what to say. Say nothing, Nathan replied. Your words can't fix what actions destroyed. The cafe was quiet around them now. A few tables had patrons quietly sipping drinks, oblivious to the charged silence at the corner table. Nathan felt a calm settle over him, a rare, solid peace that had nothing to do with anger or revenge. Jessica reached out slightly, almost touching his hand. He didn't flinch, but he didn't move toward her either. This was the last time, she said, voice breaking. I wish I could take it back. Nathan shook his head gently. You can't. You never could. Her chest heaved, tears slipping down her cheeks. I love you, she whispered, almost as if saying it might make him turn. Nathan leaned back, composed. Love is more than words. It's action, and you've shown me what yours really meant. She nodded, defeated. I understand. He stood slowly, sliding his hands into his jacket pockets. I hope you learn from this, he said. I hope you see the weight of the choices you make. Jessica didn't speak. She only watched him, silent, the weight of her own mistakes mirrored in her expression. Nathan moved toward the door without a backward glance. The soft murmur of the cafe and the clinking of cups seemed louder now, framing the finality of the moment. Jessica called out once. Faintly, Nathan. He didn't turn. He stepped outside into the drizzle, the air cool and clean against his face. He felt the wind on his skin as if it were washing away the chaos of the past months. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He didn't look back. He simply walked away, leaving behind the regrets, the manipulations, and the pleas that had come too late. He had chosen dignity over nostalgia, and with that choice, the door between them closed. Completely. Without cruelty. Without hesitation. Chapter 10, The Beginning. The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nathan's new apartment, warm and steady, painting the room in a golden glow. He sat at the kitchen island, steaming cup of coffee in hand, looking out at the city skyline, and felt an unfamiliar calm. The soft hum of traffic below mixed with the distant laughter of children in the park across the street. A life he had only dreamed a year ago now felt tangible, almost ordinary, and yet completely earned. His phone buzzed on the counter, but for once, it was not a harbinger of stress or chaos. A message from Emma, the woman who had become a quiet, steady presence in his life. Coffee at 10? I'll bring those croissants you like. Nathan smiled, a slow, real smile. He typed back quickly. See you there. Can't wait. He stood, stretching, noticing the subtle comforts that surrounded him. The apartment wasn't extravagant, but it was thoughtfully designed. Soft lighting, clean lines, shelves filled with books he actually wanted to read, photos of trips and experiences that he had chosen for himself. Each item, each decision, was a declaration of ownership of his life. Months had passed since that infamous birthday dinner, the night that had once felt like the end of everything. And yet, in the calm of this morning, Nathan realized just how much that night had changed him for the better. He had been promoted at work, not through manipulation or flattery, but because of his diligence, creativity, and resilience. He had rebuilt professional bridges burned by Jessica's lies, and this time, the respect he received was earned honestly. His salary had nearly doubled. He no longer worried about finances. No one had ever asked for a dime that didn't belong to him, and he could finally breathe, knowing his stability was his own. His new home reflected that. A modest but modern space, designed not by obligation or appearances, but by desire and comfort. The walls bore photographs of friends, of moments he wanted to remember, not as trophies, but as reminders of joy, freedom, and authenticity. Nathan walked across the hardwood floors to the window, watching the city awake, and felt gratitude for every hard lesson that had brought him here. Emma arrived later that morning, light footsteps echoing in the hall. She brought with her the scent of fresh croissants, coffee, and the warmth of genuine companionship. Nathan opened the door and was met with a grin that mirrored his own, easy and grounded. "You've outdone yourself again," she said, setting the bag on the counter. Nathan laughed, shaking his head. "Not me, just a good bakery. You," she said pointedly, "chose the place. You always make things feel effortless." He shrugged, but the smile didn't leave his face. "Effortless is earned," he said. "Believe me, I've earned this." They sat at the kitchen island, sharing croissants and conversation, letting the morning stretch luxuriously. Nathan realized how rare it felt to be in the presence of someone who brought calm instead of complication, trust instead of manipulation. The contrast to his past life with Jessica was stark and refreshing. Later, a group of friends gathered at his apartment for a small, impromptu brunch. Laughter filled the space, conversations overlapping, stories bouncing from one corner to another. Nathan watched them, truly watched them, and felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in years. These were friends he had chosen, people who knew him beyond appearances, beyond past mistakes, beyond wealth or status. Their support felt unwavering and genuine. A notification flashed on his phone, an email from work. He opened it and smiled. The company had recognized his recent project, one he had poured months of focus into, with a bonus and public acknowledgement. In a strange, satisfying symmetry, Nathan realized that the same world that had once seemed indifferent to his suffering now recognized his skill, resilience, and integrity. He leaned back in his chair and reflected. Months ago, he had been humiliated, stripped of possessions, career, and dignity in a single night orchestrated by Jessica and her family. He had walked away silently, refusing to give them the collapse they craved. That night had been intended as his ending, but now he saw clearly that it had been the first step in something far greater. He thought of the birthday dinner, the bill for $248,000, the stolen car, the forged emails, and the stage firing. He thought of Jessica begging, of Amber, of Richard Brennan, how their performance had backfired spectacularly. Witnesses, proof, and persistence had revealed the truth. He had taken control of a narrative of his life, instead of letting them dictate it. Every betrayal had forced him to rebuild stronger, smarter, and more consciously than he ever could have imagined. Nathan picked up his phone again, scrolling through messages from friends and colleagues he had reconnected with. There were no frantic calls, no threats, no manipulations. Only laughter, encouragement, invitations to share moments, and reminders that life could be gentle if he allowed it to be. He remembered walking out of that banquet hall months ago, feeling hollow but unbroken. That choice, silence instead of outrage, dignity instead of despair, had been the catalyst. Every careful step since then had been about reclaiming ownership of his career, his home, his relationships, and most importantly, his self-respect. Nathan leaned back against the chair and let himself smile fully. He thought of Emma's steady presence, his friends' laughter, the city stretching out before him, and the sense of control and possibility he now held. He had freedom, yes, but also wisdom, clarity, and a grounded sense of self he had never known in the cage of his marriage. Later that evening, Nathan walked to his balcony as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The sky turned shades of pink and gold, reflecting off the glass towers in the distance. He felt the cool wind on his face and let it remind him that the world was vast and full of opportunities. The betrayal that had once threatened to consume him was now nothing but a memory that had shaped him into someone stronger, more self-aware, and unafraid. He thought of Jessica, of the dinner, of the public spectacle meant to destroy him. He smiled faintly. She had thought she was ending him. She had thought she was controlling the narrative, that he would crumble under humiliation and loss. But she hadn't counted on one thing. Nathan Cross wasn't the man he had been. The man she tried to break had rebuilt himself, piece by piece, decision by decision, moment by moment. And in doing so, he had created a life that was authentic, full, and entirely his own. He turned away from the balcony, heading inside to join Emma and friends as laughter spilled from the kitchen, mingling with the soft music playing in the background. Nathan felt light, secure, empowered. The night that was meant to destroy him had instead become the foundation of his new life. Every insult, every theft, every false accusation had been a step toward liberation, clarity, and the joy of self-possession. Jessica thought the birthday dinner was his ending. It became his beginning.